In this episode of the Marksville Wrestling Podcast, we will be discussing Scott D'Amore's offer to buy TNA and what that entailed. We'll also be looking at TNA wrestlers Rhino and Alicia Edwards, who have their opinions on Scott D'Amore's release, and we'll end the show with a new segment that I don't think you're going to want to miss. This is Marksville Wrestling Podcast. My name is Owen. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this. If you're listening to the show on Google Podcasts, please note that the service is shutting down on April 2nd, 2024. The show will eventually go up on YouTube Music as a replacement, but in the meantime, please listen to the show on Deezer, Spotify, and YouTube. Back to the show. Well, hello and welcome back to the Marksville Wrestling Podcast. Thank you for listening. As always, my name is Owen. And I'm going to go ahead and start out the show today with the Scott D'Amore news. Now, some of this news is older. Some of it is actually as recent as 8 hours ago. So some of it actually came out the morning that I'm recording this show. But yeah, a lot of news we have to cover. I know that I covered his initial firing from TNA on the show. And just because that was one of my first episodes, I thought all of you listeners deserved an update on his, sort of departure from the company, or forced departure, I should say. But yeah, let's go ahead and look at this more recent news. So a lot of this has to do with his offer, because I did mention in that first segment on Scott D'Amore on my episode of the show that he actually offered to purchase TNA. And Anthem didn't like that, which is why they declined his offer, and they actually instituted a new, someone that was involved with Anthem is now the head of TNA, presumably creative and booking and all those things. So, Scott D'Amore actually attempted to buy the company. We have some details on his offer. Then we also have some details on Rhino and Alicia Edwards and their opinions on his departure from the company. So let's go ahead, without further ado, get into this news. So from PW Mania, we have news that basically, this is one thing I didn't mention in the opening, which is basically TNA ended up actually confiscating Scott D'Amore protest signs that were held by fans at the Sacrifice pay-per-view. And I should mention that this was actually noted on Wrestling Observer first, as it usually is. Most wrestling news that leaks like this is almost always reported on the Observer before anything else, just because they had the scoops. But yeah, this was actually leaked on the 15th of March. But basically, Scott D'Amore is, a big figure that the fans really support, and were upset that, they basically got rid of him. And Sacrifice was a big pay-per-view that just recently happened for TNA. And we all know that, pay-per-views are spaces in which people like to have signs, because there's a lot of eyes on the product. And, people like to have signs at weekly television shows as well, but especially on pay-per-views, only because it gets more of an exposure generally, right? People have to buy it to watch it. So therefore you're going to have really ardent people tuning in to see it. And I should say, obviously, generally, there are more people watching TV, right? Because it's free. But bigger fans, more of a, sort of pomp and circumstance with pay-per-views, because you're getting the dedicated fan base rather than sort of the more quote-unquote casual fans who are likely to tune in on TV every now and then. But yeah, so the signs that were held at Sacrifice protesting Scott D'Amore, we don't exactly know what they said on them. They could have had slogans. They could have even had something like memes, which are very common on wrestling signs nowadays. But I suspect they're just, noting things like bring back Scott D'Amore, Anthem, Anthem sucks, things like that, right? And turns out that these were actually confiscated from the fans just moments after those same fans brought them into into the building of Sacrifice, where Sacrifice took place. So what happened is basically staff took away these signs, and look, it's not a clear indication of anything on Anthem's part. It's not even a clear that there's, not a clear omission that, wow, maybe we shouldn't have fired Scott. I don't think that's going through their minds at all, because let's be honest, the firing of Scott was completely a business decision only. It had no, no basis of, oh, the fans, what are the fans going to like? What are the wrestlers going to like? What are the staffers going to like? Because if that was the case, they would have just kept Scott around, because he was everyone's favorite. No one wanted him to go away. So, um, you know, basically, there's no reason to do it other than a business decision. And like I mentioned in the episode, and where I basically broke down his firing, um, companies like to do this a lot, where they kind of replace existing talents with their own corporate, people who kind of climbed up the ladder. And this doesn't apply to wrestling particularly, just kind of the corporate landscape in general. If there's somebody that's more qualified but doesn't have that title, a lot of times they'll get replaced by the people who have the corporate title but maybe don't really know what they're doing. And that's what happened here. They really replaced a guy that knows everything about wrestling, but especially everything about Impact Wrestling. And he has something that, it's intangible. He's somebody that everyone respects. Everyone in the business says something positive about. He's not a controversial figure whatsoever in the wrestling business, at least not that I'm aware of. And he's just somebody that you get praise from, whenever his name is mentioned, he gets praised. And I think it was really short-sighted and ridiculous that he was replaced in the first place. Um, but at the end of the day, like I said, it was a corporate decision only, and we already talked about all this. But the only reason I'm getting at it is because I think people are trying to twist this, that maybe TNA, has a sort of end game here. They have a goal. They have we want to restructure the direction of the booking. We want to change the way the card. We want to have a different top guy. Who knows? But I don't think any of that's happening. I don't think Anthem is really in touch with the product as much as maybe they think they do. And I think right now they're just getting by with, whatever other writers were there in addition to Scott Demore. They're probably getting help from some of the wrestlers writing their own segments, at least partially, if I had to guess. And, because it's still going well, the product is still, enjoyed by the people who watch it generally, then they're not really going to change anything right now. And if they turn down, and we'll get into the deal that Scott offered them, but if they turn down that deal, all I'm going to say for you right now is if they turn down that deal, then they really think they can get a lot more money, and they might be a little bit delusional, if you ask me. Um, but in any case, I don't think there was a structural, we're going to change the outlook of TNA here. I don't think that's what it is. I think they just made it a business decision. No one liked it, because why would you? And now they're facing backlash in the form of protest signs that they're having to confiscate so that they don't get, the negative attention. And they're just kind of being told by everybody, hey, why did you do this? They don't like hearing that. Of course they don't. They're a big company. They own a wrestling promotion that maybe they don't, it's not the number one thing on their mind right now. And their fans are upset. So what are they going to do? They're just going to shut them up and hope it goes away, right? But I don't know if it'll go away anytime soon, only because, as we're about to get to in a second here, multiple TNA talents have spoken up and said, hey, we don't like this. And we did mention that letter in the first coverage of this on the show, that the TNA locker room wrote an open letter to Anthem Entertainment, which isn't something you can often get an entire locker room behind, writing one letter to the holding company of their promotion. I mean, that's a big deal. So, without further ado, this next portion has to do with those talents. One of them is Rhino. Now, Rhino is obviously a TNA legend. And, he's somebody that had been in TNA for a long time. He was also in WWE, ECW. Rhino's a veteran of the business, and he's kind of been everywhere. But he is in recent years known for his work in TNA. He was with Heath Slater, who went by a couple different names. Of course, that's what he went by in WWE. But regardless, Rhino, teamed with him more recently in TNA, and he actually spoke up. In an interview with Wrestling Inc., or I should say it's an appearance for Monopoly Events, but this interview was captured by Wrestling Inc. Rhino spoke openly about the situation with Scott D'Amore and his firing and all that stuff. And here's what he said. It sucks that there's a change in management. It's unfortunate, but sometimes in life as a veteran in wrestling, you have to be a leader in the locker room. It's like, okay, let's see how this thing rolls out with new management, and let's put our best foot forward, and let's do what we do and kick ass. Sometimes people don't like change, but sometimes you have to embrace and then see where it takes you. And then if it's not for you, just move on. Hopefully for the wrestling business, it continues to move forward because a lot of good wrestling promotions out there are good for the wrestling business. So with the headlines and stuff, people are really trying to push this as a Rhino shoots on TNA, Rhino hates Anthem, Rhino misses Scott D'Amore and wants it back immediately. I mean, that's what wrestling dirt sheets do, right? They do clickbait. Um, but the only outwardly negative thing comes at the very beginning of it, which is of this interview, which is it sucks that there's a change in management. It's unfortunate. That's really the only portion where he's directly saying, hey, I disagree with this change. I think it was a bad decision. And, that's the only really juicy thing that I think people are getting away with. But at the same time, you can tell he's trying to be cordial about this. He's trying to be respectful. He's trying to take it one day at a time. Because look, if Anthem does a good job, and I mean, so far the product has still been good. So if Anthem does a good job, then, we're going to eat our words. And, after all, maybe it was a good decision, right? But he, really leans into that. And he's a veteran. So he's been through a lot of different locker rooms, a lot of different changes in leadership in those locker rooms. And like he says in here, he has to be a leader. So I think he knows deep down that it sucks and that it's not ideal. But he is trying to be really, just hopeful and for the future. And I think that shows how much of a stand-up guy Rhino is in the world of wrestling. And I look, it does give it little insight into the locker room sentiment, but I would wager a guess that Rhino's probably a little bit more generous with these words than a lot of TNA wrestlers would be, just based on that talent letter that I mentioned in another episode. Is these wrestlers really seemed to be disappointed and upset, and that talent letter felt like it came from a place of genuine disappointment and frustration. So based on that sentiment, it kind of feels like maybe Rhino's being more generous than your average TNA talent would be, but who knows? We don't have a look directly into the locker room. We just have what we know. And, obviously a lot of these wrestlers want to keep their contracts, so they don't say a lot, right? And they kind of keep things under wraps in order to hold on to their contract with the company. So we don't really truly know what a lot of them are thinking. But we do know what one Alicia Edwards is thinking. Alicia Edwards currently with her husband, Eddie Edwards, as part of the system, that heel faction that's been taking over TNA right now. And she actually spoke on the Scott D'Amore situation as of yesterday. Or at least this was when this was published on postwrestling.com. And she actually spoke about D'Amore and, her sort of opinion on the news. She spoke about it on the iHeartRadio podcast Eyes Up Here, with Francine. And basically, here's what she said. I'll quote it the same way I did with Rhino. But she said, I think everyone was shocked about Scott D'Amore's exit from TNA. I think the wrestling world was shocked. The locker room was shocked. I think our momentum is probably the highest it's been in years, even a decade, I would say. I've been with Impact for 6, 7 years, so almost close to a decade, I think, is we have the highest momentum we've had. So I think the firing of Scott, I was a little blindsided, but I mean, what are you going to do? I'm loyal to Scott, but I'm also loyal to TNA, and I think the engine needs to keep running, and I think we need to keep the momentum going. That's all we can really do. Scott was a real puzzle piece in our journey that we had making TNA what it is now. But I mean, at the end of the day, the locker room did as much work as Scott did. So I think the locker room just needs to come together and stay positive and keep the ball rolling. And I mean, that's all we can really do at this point. And I guess the bummer is because the morale in the locker room is very high right now. But I mean, maybe that's a blessing in disguise. And I think that's truly going to bring all of us together to make sure that there are going to be people that are emotionally attached to Scott. Scott wasn't just our boss, he was our mentor. He was a coach. He inspired us, he pushed us, he yelled at us. You know what I mean? It was all of it. So he was very important to a lot of people on the roster, and we built a lot of relationships over the years too. So it was like we had to grieve a little bit. But at the end of the day, the show doesn't stop. We got to keep going, and right now our momentum's good. So I think that kind of echoes a lot of what Rhino said. It is similar in nature to what Rhino said, but one of the big pieces of information from that quote that I wanted to draw you to um, was the momentum piece. The 6 or 7 years of impact that she had been there were under Scott D'Amore, and she felt like he had built something really special. And that's basically what I said on my analysis of his firing was, wow, TNA is really growing right now. They're building a lot of momentum, and I would say at least half the locker room, half Scott D'Amore. Half of the reason they've gotten this far is because of him, and it kind of feels like TNA's throwing that away, and she felt a similar way, but she didn't quite say it that harshly because at the end of the day, she's loyal to Impact, like she said, and she knows it's a business decision that they're going to have to get used to. So, I do think that it echoes again that sort of we don't like this, but we're gonna have to move on and keep going sentiment that Rhino expressed. But it also is similar to my sentiment, in which they built a lot of momentum. They made the product really great, way better than it has been in a long time, and now it's kind of uncertain. The future's uncertain because the man who helped build all that momentum is now gone, and you're not really. That's weird, right? What do you do now? So regardless, um little bit of another sort of nugget here comes from SEScoops.com, which is that TNA Wrestling has actually, is going through the process of scaling down some of the contract offers they make to their talent, signaling, a structure change, a structuring change, corporate structuring change, I should say, and kind of what they're willing to spend their money on, maybe. But yeah, this report was originally published by Fightful Select. But basically, TNA may be leaning toward more, offers of to their wrestlers, being on per date deals as opposed to full time contracts. So TNA does kind of operate like an indie in a lot of ways. They don't have the $2 million a year deals like AEW and WWE does, although, you know, those range, right, based on the talent level, but they don't have contracts nearly that big. TNA does more, $40,000 a year, depending on the wrestler. And most of these wrestlers make their income whole by wrestling on the indies and JPW. They've even had a relationship with AEW at times. Back when Kenny Omega held the world title there. Same with Christian Cage. Um, so basically what's going on is TNA is supposedly when when their deals come up on some of their wrestlers, they're going to work on offering them per appearance, per date, but it's generally referred to as per appearance. And you could also say maybe per show, right? I don't know if they're going to say, hey, look, here's 3 months of your weekly Impact episode, and you'll be on this pay per view, and we're going to pay you this much for those appearances. Or if they're going to say, you worked tonight's episode of Impact, you get paid lump sum, boom. We worked this pay-per-view, you get paid a lump sum, boom. I don't know if they're going to do that. But these offers are quite different than what is typically expected from a TNA deal. um, and again, not sure how many wrestlers it applies to, but it looks like at least some of their talents are going to get some per date deals as per Fightful Select. So we'll have to see how that shapes up. I wanted to throw that in here before I get to the deal that Scott D'Amore made, or tried to make, because I just think that tells you, wow, they really are trying to restructure, and they could potentially, hopefully for them not, but these deals might not be seen as lucrative to the talents. Some of the talents who are making the sort of upper echelon contracts in TNA, like, I don't know, a Moose, or a an Alex Shelley, or a Josh Alexander, or Jordan Grace. Those wrestlers might prefer those contracts, and they may not want to do the per appearance deals. If you uh, agree to a date, and something comes up and you're not able to make it, that changes how much you're able to earn. That changes your income actively. If Jordan Grace had a someone in her family come down sick, and she couldn't make an episode of Impact, she's still getting paid on her yearly deal, or whatever, however that deal is structured. But when per appearance deals happen, that might not be the case. And I'm not saying that that's an occurrence that happens a lot, but indie wrestlers especially definitely would like to have their schedules kind of planned out ahead of time. And I think this kind of might muddy the waters, but we shall see. And I think it just kind of has to do with Anthem Entertainment trying to differentiate the way they do business now that they control Impact, with one of their own members, as opposed to Scott D'Amore. So now, without further ado, speaking of Scott D'Amore, let's get into the offer he actually made Anthem to go ahead and buy TNA, not Anthem. He's going to buy TNA. And basically, shortly before he got fired, Scott D'Amore attempted to purchase TNA from Anthem. Upon his firing, it was said that he basically had help from a major financial institution. According to Dave Meltzer, good old Davey Boy from Wrestling Observer, he found out that Scott D'Amore actually offered TNA around $10 million. And he would, in addition to the $10 million to purchase TNA, he would take on all the existing debts of the company. Basically, Anthem, and I hinted to this earlier, but Anthem, without any counteroffer or anything, just turned down the offer. And I don't think they really explained a whole lot as to why. I think they just really want to control TNA in its entirety. They don't want it to be a separate company. They want it to be the wrestling extension of Anthem Entertainment, right? They want it to be um, just kind of another subsidiary. And they want us to think of TNA not as total nonstop action wrestling, but as Anthem Entertainment's wrestling division, right? And that's kind of how it feels with all these, they're changing the nature of the deals. They're getting rid of Scott D'Amore. That's kind of how all these changes are starting to feel. And in any case, when I mentioned major financial institution, Scott D'Amore had behind him the D'Amore Group, which is obviously named for him. But the D'Amore Group basically did a valuation of TNA Wrestling, not Anthem again, but TNA Wrestling, and they determined that it was worth between $7 and $12 million. So Scott D'Amore's offer of 10 was about right in the middle there. I would say a pretty fair valuation. But for whatever reason, Anthem did not take him up on that, and now we're in the situation where we are right now, without any real, uh, certainty on why or how or anything in regards to Scott D'Amore's firing. Um, but we also don't really know what they plan to do with those contracts, and that's another big question mark. I'm sure there's more question marks in TNA in general, just because of how um, you know unexpected the firing of Scott D'Amore was. But those two items, I think, are really sort of in a lot of people's minds right now. So that's going to do it for this update on Scott D'Amore and TNA Wrestling. And we will see you back right after this. The Marksville Wrestling Podcast is brought to you by Patreon. Patreon.com/Marksville Wrestling is where you can find the podcast early before it drops on other platforms, and it is also the home of exclusive behind-the-scenes content, Q&As, and more. If you like the show and would like to support it, please consider doing so on Patreon. Again, that's patreon.com/Marksville Wrestling. Thanks for the support, and back to the show. Welcome back. So I wanted to finish this episode by introducing what could be a new recurring segment on the show. It's something that I wanted to kind of start out with and see what the feedback was, how the reception was from all you listening. So as always on my Instagram, which is at Marksville Wrestling, you can find all of my links. I have a Mastodon, I have a Patreon, and if you go to those links, you can stream the podcast however you like, and you can interact with the show. And I would just ask you to go ahead and give me some feedback on this new segment wherever you like on any one of those platforms. I'll take a look at those comments and I'll use that to, for the future, whether we want to bring back this podcast or not, this segment or not, I will make my decision based on that feedback. So, without further ado, I want to introduce this segment. It is basically Chat GPT booking episodes of wrestling. So we all know good old fantasy booking, right? It's where a fan of wrestling books a wrestling show the way they would want it to be booked if they were the head of creative. And we also, a lot of us know what Chat GPT is as well, which is generative AI. It's one of these big robots that is becoming very popular and landscape changing nowadays. And ChatGPT in particular is one of the most famous and, widely used chatbots, which means you communicate it over text. It doesn't generate images. It doesn't do videos, audio. It just talks to you over text. And it's supposed to be able to kind of generate anything you want it to, because it pulls a lot of information from the internet. That's where AI gets all of its information from in general. But yeah, so I wanted to do a segment where I go ahead and I actually fantasy book episodes of weekly television programming using a chatbot. I'm also going to go ahead and experiment with Google Gemini if this is well received. But today we're doing Chat GPT, just because it's the most accessible. And we're going to ask it to book an episode of AEW Dynamite, and we're going to ask it to book an episode of WWE Raw. And again, before I get into this, please do let me know how you feel about this segment. Let me know if you'd like me to bring it back, and if you'd like it to, die after one go. So without further ado, I did ask ChatGPT to, book these before I actually got on here and started recording, just so they would be ready to go. We're gonna start with WrestleMania 40 and WWE Raw. Obviously, it is WrestleMania season, into the thick of it. The show is only 2 weeks away at this point, and I should mention I will be there again live in Philadelphia, bringing you content from all of my socials. So please remember to follow and keep up to me when I am in WrestleMania in Philadelphia for WrestleMania weekend. But yeah, so this episode that ChatGPT booked, I actually asked it to book the go home show of WrestleMania 40. And I want to preface this by saying, um, the ChatGPT got a lot of things wrong, and a lot of things wrong, because it basically pulled from episodes of Raw that are, I don't know, 5 years old, or more, and a lot of just outdated information. A lot of wrestlers who no longer work there, a lot of wrestlers who are not working because they're hurt, a lot of feuds that have, been down the gutter a long time ago, a lot of just segments that wouldn't make sense. So I want to preface that right now. But what I did with this segment, the way I structured it is, I'm basically going to give you what ChatGPT told me first, how it would book the show without any edits. And then I'm going to tell you how ChatGPT booked it after I gave it all of the edits. And after it kind of, I did all of the sort of manipulating with it that I could. So basically, we're going to have a before and after to see what ChatGPT originally booked, and then what it booked after a human helped it out, with the booking. And then I'm just going to give my thoughts on maybe what I would do if I was ChatGPT, what I would change about that booking decision, and just kind of say, do I like it? Does it make sense? And yeah, go from there. So here's the first booking decision it made. I asked it to book a simple prompt: please book the go home show of WWE WrestleMania 40. It says it is WWE Raw live from T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada, with commentary table of Michael Cole and Corey Graves. Obviously, we know it is now Michael Cole and Pat McAfee, so you can see right out the gate operating on some outdated information. The show opens with an opening promo that's going to last about 20 minutes. But first, there's a video package highlighting the key matches and moments leading up to WrestleMania 40. Now, there can be a little bit, but generally, episodes of Raw don't have full video packages. That's usually those are usually reserved for pay per views. There's obviously, promo video packages that are used to build up feuds, but not for the entire card, right? They're not going to do a breakdown of every match on the Mania 40 card at the beginning of a episode of WWE Raw. That doesn't make too much sense. That's something that would happen on the WrestleMania 40 card proper. But regardless, here's something that again doesn't make sense. The Miz and Maurice come out. Maurice has been absent from WWE programming for a long time at this point. They come out to the ring for a promo. They hype up their match against Edge and Beth Phoenix at WrestleMania, claiming that they will destroy the power couple. Edge and Beth Phoenix, obviously, neither of them are wrestling for WWE at this point, and this was already a feud that happened a while ago. So, yeah, already starting off with some outdated information. I think a lot of what ChatGPT does is just drawing from events that occurred, which means a lot of these things are going to be things that did actually take place in wrestling. They're not going to be things that, because Chat GPT doesn't have human intuition and logic and rationality, where maybe not as much creativity, right? It's a robot, so it's not operating on what it wants to happen. It doesn't want anything to happen. It just wants to generate information, so it's going off of largely what did happen and what could happen, but therefore there's not a lot of creative avenues and a lot of sort of liberties that ChatGPT is taking when it books these cards. So just want to get that out of the way, because you can already tell there's some inaccuracies here. But segment two of the show would be a singles match that was going to last 10 minutes, where Matt Riddle would take on Sami Zayn and pick up the win with his finisher. Obviously, Matt Riddle, due to a lot of controversy, no longer works with WWE, so that's inaccurate. Sami Zayn and Riddle, I'm not sure what their feud would be going into WrestleMania. I don't know if they were supposed to be in a match. Usually you're not going to run a match that would show up on WrestleMania, you know, at the Raw before, but maybe it was to set up Riddle versus somebody else, and he was just getting momentum by beating Sami Zayn, or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe they were going to face off in a tag match, and that's why they have a singles feud here. But you can't read too much into it because it is just a bot that doesn't really know what it is doing on a large scale. So then we have the third segment of the show, which is a backstage interview that lasts 5 minutes, in which Roman Reigns and Paul Heyman are interviewed backstage. We got a feud that is about 2 years old at this point. Reigns vows to defeat Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania and retain his Universal Championship. That the last time Roman and Brock faced off in a main event feud in general was at WrestleMania 38 in Dallas, for that, you know, unifying main event in which that led to Roman holding both belts like he does now. So yeah, this is about 2 years old here, but you know, I'm not saying this wasn't a good feud at the time. It's just not, it wouldn't make sense for WrestleMania 40. Then we have the Street Profits taking on the Usos. The Usos are obviously in a blood feud right now because they are at a brother versus brother rivalry junction in their careers. They're no longer a tag team. So them being a tag team makes no sense and is something we saw a lot of because that's what they've been doing for the majority of their careers, but not right now. So again, find it strange that I did mention WrestleMania 40. I did mention the year 2024. So the fact that it still kind of thought that the Usos would be fighting for the tag championships is strange to me, but regardless, um the New Day after this match come out, and I should mention the Usos end up picking up that win in that perspective match. The next is an in-ring segment the last 10 minutes where the New Day come out and cut a promo about their match against the Undisputed Era at WrestleMania, who have been disbanded for, I want to say, 3.5 years at this point. But the New Day says they promise to show that they are the greatest tag team of all time. If I had to guess, it's probably going to be a trios match, right? Because Undisputed Era, at its height, had 4 members, if I'm not mistaken: Kyle O'Reilly, Bobby Fish, Roderick Strong, and Adam Cole. Yeah, 5 members. And the New Day had 3, so that could be a trios match, likely, but who knows? You know, this match wouldn't have happened because it is 2024, and the Undisputed Era is mostly in AEW right now. 2 of those men working as the Undisputed Kingdom, and Kyle O'Reilly has been courted to join that faction. We don't know if that's going to happen, but regardless, faction's been broken up. Most of those guys are no longer in WWE at all. Actually, all of them, I should say, are no longer in WWE. Roger Strong had his run as the leader of the Diamond Mine in NXT, but other than that, yeah, that was it for that. And the fact that the Undisputed Era have been pitched by ChatGPT to take place in a match at WrestleMania 40 makes no sense. But again, it is what it is. That this is the start, right? It's hopefully only gonna get better from here. But then we have a singles match for 15 minutes in which Bianca Belair takes on Sasha Banks. Belair actually goes over here with the KOD, getting momentum heading into her Raw Women's Championship match. So not sure who she would be facing off against. Maybe somebody like Becky Lynch or Charlotte Flair, because she beat somebody like Sasha Banks, who was easily main event a card of WrestleMania. So the fact that Bianca picks up the win here would relegate Sasha from the WrestleMania card, and it would also pit Belair against someone who isn't Sasha for that women's championship match. But obviously, Sasha no longer in WWE. We covered her debut for AEW earlier this week at Big Business, and she's obviously now known as Mercedes Moné. But yeah, again, we're working with the best Chat GPT has right now. But that, I mean, look, would it be a good match? Would it be a good way to set up a match at Mania? I don't think so, because somebody, you know, when you have these momentum building matches at a go home show, they are not supposed to be against main event uh, talents, right? Like Roman Reigns would not be defeating Drew McIntyre, even though they're not going to face each other at WrestleMania. He would not have that match at Raw. That makes no sense. So again, this match, therefore, by that logic, would not make a lot of sense. Um, Regardless, backstage we have Becky Lynch, who is interviewed about her WrestleMania match against Ronda Rousey. So this is the first time that ChatGPT actually directly contradicts itself, because it goes on to say that Becky Lynch vows she will walk out of WrestleMania as the Raw Women's Champion by defeating Ronda Rousey, who in this case is presumably the current WrestleMania World Champion. But maybe, hey, maybe it's not a contradiction. Maybe they're just saying that Bianca Belair would take on Ronda Rousey and Becky Lynch in a triple threat, which we did. We obviously have gotten the, WWE WrestleMania women's triple threat main event. Becky Lynch at WrestleMania 35 coming out victorious in that. But again, it's really retracing steps and just being kind of ambiguous here with its booking. But then we get the main event, which is a contract signing. This one would actually be feasible, which is why I'm surprised it sort of booked it, but I'm also not surprised because it makes sense, but it's still, again, not feasible based on how um WWE has been booking themselves right now, but it is feasible in the sense that it could have actually happened. Basically, what I mean by that is Randy Orton would have had to have one elimination chamber for this match to take place, but it's still likely, still plausible. And basically, it's a contract signing that shows Randy Orton and Seth Rollins signed for their WWE Heavyweight Championship match at WrestleMania. So, like I said, this could have happened, right? Instead, it's going to be Drew McIntyre versus Seth Rollins. But if Randy Orton won that match at Elimination Chamber, which he was in, and it would have given him a title shot, then yes, he would be plausibly at a contract signing against Seth Rollins on the episode of WWE Raw before Mania. That is very likely and plausible. So I think that's really the main only plausible thing on this card. But hey, if you're gonna get one thing right, you know get the main event right. If you're gonna get one thing right, definitely get the main event right. It ends up with a brawl between Orton and Rollins to close out the show, which is very common for contract signings. So I think it got the main event right, but it really did not get anything else right whatsoever. And so I had to do about, I want to say, 4 or 5 more edits here before I got to the end. Before I got to, I said we did the before, this is the after. And this one's a lot more, I don't want to say a lot, but there are definitely a lot more plausible matches that take place. I don't know if the card as a whole is more plausible, but there's definitely a few more matches that seem more plausible here on the card. First off, I want to mention that it takes place at Barclays Center live in Brooklyn, New York, which is, if I'm not mistaken, where this episode of Raw might actually be taking place. Because they usually do the go home shows in a different town, and they usually do the Raw and SmackDown after Mania in the same town as Mania itself. So maybe mistaken on that, but regardless, Michael Cole and Corey Graves are your commentators again, which is wrong, but no worries there. The opening segment is pretty wrong. Like I said, there's here and there. There are some things that are accurate. There are some things that are not. The opening segment is one that is not accurate, which is an opening segment of the last 15 minutes. It's a promo. Seth Rollins comes out and cuts a fiery promo about his upcoming WWE Championship match. So far, it's all good. But then ChatGPT says that match would be against Gunther, which makes no sense. And then Gunther says he vows to reclaim the title that he believes is rightfully his. So obviously, 2 men are both champions. 2 men are going to be in championship matches at Mania, but not against each other. And, this would make no sense. But look, if we're looking at this in a vacuum, Rollins and Gunther in a title versus title match would be pretty epic if you ask me. But um, that's not what ChatGPT is implying. It's implying something completely different. But yeah, in a vacuum, if Seth Rollins and Gunther faced off in a title versus title match at Mania without any of the prior storylines being implemented, that would be a banger of a match. I think. I don't think we want to do a title versus title match, for what's basically a main event title against a mid card title. But stranger things have happened. I don't think it would be that bad. And look, Gunther versus Seth Rollins would be an absolute banger of a match. So you can take the title implications out of it, and it would still be a great match to watch. The singles match after that is actually Cody versus Sami Zayn. I should say Cody Rhodes. I think you probably already knew who I meant when I said Cody. But anyway, Cody and Sami Zayn also makes no sense because Sami Zayn is actually taking on Gunther for his Intercontinental titles that I previously mentioned. But in this case, Rhodes would have picked up the win via a crossroads, which, look, I already mentioned this, but you're not going to have somebody defeat another main event title. I mean, talent, sorry. Sami Zayn is going to go on to defeat Gunther, maybe, or Gunther retains. I don't know. But in any case, you don't want him getting defeated by Cody here because that just makes him look like a loser, and it would make him look like even bigger of a loser headed into his match with Gunther. So that makes no sense. Would it be a good match from a wrestling perspective? Of course it would be, but that's not what we're debating here. We're debating the booking and the storyline implications of all this. And generally, the storyline implications of what ChatGPT does are absolutely abhorrent in the current wrestling landscape. I mean, again, if we look at this in a vacuum and say that none of this is currently ongoing, then a lot of these matches and storylines are great. But I did specifically ask it to base all of this booking on the current feuds and storylines in WWE. So, on that premise, it's all wrong. The next segment of this show is Roman Reigns, who is shown backstage preparing for his Universal Championship defense against Drew McIntyre. He's approached by The Rock, who offers some words of wisdom and encouragement. That's accurate. That would be fine. I'm sure that's probably something that is going to happen. But the one thing they got wrong was that he's defending against Drew McIntyre and not Cody Rhodes, which that's a bigger deal than that is a bigger deal because in this case, what's going on with Seth Rollins here? Because Seth Rollins is facing Drew McIntyre for the world heavyweight title, but in the Chat GPT's booking perspective, Seth Rollins is actually facing Gunther. So I'm not sure what got lost in translation, but in any case, like I always say, this isn't perfect, so got a few things wrong. Would Drew McIntyre and Roman Reigns at WrestleMania for a Universal Championship match be great wrestling? Of course it would be. Of course it would be a great match if booked right. Look, Cody in his babyface role is perfect for Roman. But if they wanted to do Drew and they forgo, let's say, what if Cody was still in AEW, right? If they wanted to put Drew McIntyre in this spot, it would be great. And it would be similar to what he did when he won the world title from Brock at WrestleMania in 2020. But I don't know if they would put Drew over in this case because he's maybe not that big of a deal in the same way Cody is. But who knows? Maybe Drew, if again in a vacuum, was booked in this spot, maybe he would have had long-term booking that would have made him as over as Cody, because we know he was as over as Cody is right now at one time, and that was back in 2020 when he unfortunately had to win the title against a crowd of 0 fans. So in any case, good stuff. Would make sense in a vacuum. Doesn't make sense here. Segment 4 is a tag team match, and ChatGPT does it once again. They have the Usos actually in a tag team match against the Judgment Day. and the Judgment Day pick up the win. I don't want to talk too much about that because I can't make judgments on a match in which there is no active tag team, that it implies there is, because the Usos are, like I said, a blood feud against each other. There's no way they'd be in this match. Next up, Bayley comes out to the ring for a promo mocking her WrestleMania opponent, Rhea Ripley, and promising to humiliate her. So in this case, Bayley's actually a heel, and she will be taking on Rhea Ripley for presumably a title. It doesn't mention which. But that's pretty crazy. Because basically you've flipped the script. It's supposed to be Bayley versus Io Sky and Rhea versus Becky, but in this case they've done Becky versus Rhea, which based on Elimination Chamber and Royal Rumble could have happened, but that's not what the winners, not even the participants, but the winners of those respective matches ended up doing. They ended up choosing the opposite of that. So Bayley taking on Rhea doesn't make sense, and Rhea taking on Bayley doesn't make sense. So, um, you know, I just would it be good again? Yes, but I also think Bayley being a heel here makes no sense because Bayley's supposed to be a babyface, and that's why they booked Bayley against Io, because Rhea is the babyface of her respective match against Becky. So boom, you have that all perfect, and ChatGPT tries to come in here and mess it up. But yes, in a vacuum, a Bayley versus Rhea match at Mania would be great. But it doesn't make sense based on current storylines. Next up, we have Rhea taking up Io Sky, who, if Io Sky wasn't the women's champion, I think her losing to Rhea would be a good momentum building match at a go home show, but she's a big star right now, so you can't do that to her. Next up we have Becky Lynch, who's interviewed in a 5-minute backstage segment about her Raw Women's Championship match against Charlotte Flair, who is not currently booked for the Mania card at all. And look, they're kind of treading water here again. They're going back to a previous feud and a previous match and a previous storyline that is nowhere near the current storyline in WWE. So I'm not quite sure how they got to this point, because I should mention that when I booked this, or when I asked ChatGPT to book it, I asked ChatGPT to only include a list of wrestlers, and those wrestlers I included were ones that are in, big name title feuds, big main event feuds in WrestleMania 40. So Charlotte Flair makes no sense because I didn't include her in that list. But in any case, it is just kind of going back to a few that we've already seen years ago from now. I'm sorry, before now. But next up, we have a contract signing that lasts 15 minutes, in which Randy Orton and Logan Paul have a contract signing. The segment is tense. Both men exchange heated words and nearly fight each other. Randy Orton and Logan Paul are facing off for the WWE United States Championship, so they got that right. But what they're missing is that Kevin Owens is also in that feud. That match will be a triple threat, in which Logan Paul will likely retain, as I mentioned on my, sort of predictions for the WWE WrestleMania 40 card in a previous episode. But Randy Orton and Logan Paul having a contract signing makes sense. It's a triple threat. So Kevin Owens would likely need to be there too. This is probably the most likely thing we have on this show so far, right? The closest to current storylines, at least. Finally, we have a main event that is a 6-man tag team match that, look, is a 6-man tag team match between baby faces and heels something they do on go-home shows? Yes, it is. 100% yes, it is. So I'm actually kind of surprised ChatGPT got to that conclusion. But what doesn't make sense is Roman Reigns teaming with Kevin Owens and Drew McIntyre to take on Seth Rollins, Gunther, and Randy Orton. That makes no sense. One thing it does mention is that the match actually ends in a non-finish. Basically, there's a disqualification that ends in all 6 men brawling, and it sets the stage for their respective matches at WrestleMania. So Roman Reigns, Kevin Owens, and Drew McIntyre on the heel side of things doesn't make sense because Kevin Owens is a babyface. They would be taking on Seth Rollins, Gunther, and Randy Orton. Oh, sorry for the on there, but Seth Rollins, Gunther, and Randy Orton. And Seth is the babyface. Gunther is the heel. Randy Orton is a babyface. So again, they're kind of mixing stuff up there. Maybe if they switched out Gunther and Kevin Owens, this would be more plausible. I mean, if you look at it that way, then every one of them is a match with each other, right? Because Randy Orton's taking on Kevin Owens, albeit in a triple threat. Drew McIntyre's taking on Seth Rollins. Gunther's taking on no one there, actually, I should say, because Sami Zayn's in that match. And then Roman Reigns is also an odd one out because Cody's absent from that match. So if they did a little bit of tweaking, it would make sense. But you also want to keep the main event guys kind of out of a main event of WWE Raw because they're going to be the main event of WrestleMania. So you don't really want to work them too hard like that. But without further ado, the show closes with a video package hyping up WrestleMania 40, which is likely what will, in fact, happen for the actual WWE Raw episode, acting as the go-home show of Mania 40. So we're going to do the same for AEW Dynamite, but I will preface this and let you know that this one is more for fun because I tried multiple times to get it to book with wrestlers that are only currently in AEW and not wrestlers who have left, not wrestlers who are on hiatus. And I had a really hard time understanding that. And I tried to give a list of wrestlers. I tried to, do all of those things, and it just didn't really work too well. So this one, I do want to say, not going to have a clean before and after like the episode of Raw did. But I am just going to basically say, this is what it booked. I asked it to book an AEW Dynamite episode for March 27th, 2024. So as I'm recording this episode right now, that would be a week from today. I didn't want to get it too bogged down on what the actual card for tonight's episode of Dynamite was. I'm not sure if it's even aware of those things, but just in case. So it starts out with an opening segment in which Samoa Joe and Dark Order are mentioned because they actually had successful title defenses from the previous week of Dynamite. That's right. The Dark Order in ChatGPT's world are tag team champions, which I would love personally, but doesn't make any sense in regards to storylines. Next up, Hangman Adam Page takes on Ethan Page in a singles match. Basically, the two pages clash in a hard-hitting encounter, each looking to establish themselves as the top contender in the company. Hangman Page secures the victory with a buckshot lariat. And yeah, I mean, that's a pretty classic AEW match to open a card, if you ask me. Ethan Page has been, absent from AEW programming for a while now, but it is plausible. It would be good. It makes sense. And that's probably the best piece of booking ChatGPT has made so far in general. Next up, we have a backstage promo in which Mercedes Moné is interviewed about her recent victories and her goals in AEW. Now, she hasn't had a singles match in AEW yet, but this is fair, right? ChatGPT is doing its best putting together a quick backstage promo. She talks about wanting to challenge for the AEW Women's Championship and prove that she is the best, which again, very common, very likely, but also not likely that, she would already be having won matches because as it stands today, not in a match so far. I'm sure they'll set that up soon, but right now she's just been doing promos in the ring. Next up, we have Mercedes Moné taking on Layla Hirsch. Layla Hirsch has been absent again from AEW. She's actually commonly on ROH right now. But Moné would face off against the technically skilled Layla Hirsch in a women's match, which again, very likely could happen and plausible, but Layla Hirsch absent from AEW programming right now, so it won't happen. anytime soon. Monet picks up the win. Um, doesn't say what she wins with. Doesn't say what finisher she uses. Sorry, but she does pick up the win with a dominant display, and it solidifies her as a top contender in the women's division, which we already knew. Could be a great match, but again, doesn't make sense with the current booking of things just because of Layla Hirsch's AEW status. But if she was to have that match, I think it would be great momentum builder for Mercedes Monet, not Mercedes Martinez. And I think it would be a good match. Next up, we have a promo segment in which the Inner Circle, no longer a faction that exists, right? We know that. But that is Chris Jericho, Santana, and Ortiz, just the three of them. They actually demand a rematch against the very strange put together tag team of Darby Allin, Sammy Guevara, and Colt Cabana, which sounds to me like a tag team or a trio, rather, that would come together on a pre show match at a pay per view, but nowhere else, right? It just kind of seems like a convenient, very odd pairing, if you ask me. So they actually, this trio of Guevara, Darby Allin, and Colt Cabana, claimed that last week's loss to the Inner Circle was a fluke, and they're still the dominant force in AEW. Which, I'm going to be honest, why would this team do that if the Inner Circle is the one demanding a rematch? That makes no sense. The Inner Circle presumably won this match because it said Guevara, Allen, and Cabana lost last week, but they're the ones coming out and demanding a rematch, so that makes no sense to me. But look, it's plausible, I guess, in a vacuum, but literally none of this makes sense just generally, because the Inner Circle aren't a team anymore, and Darby Allin, Sammy Guevara, and Colt Cabana makes no sense as a team together. I should also mention Guevara in a match against the Inner Circle, if the Inner Circle was still intact, makes no sense, because guess what? He was an active member of the Inner Circle. So that one's really a wash. Next up, we have that match, which is based, as a result of that promo, or that backstage segment, I should say. The Inner Circle taking on Darby Allin, Sammy Guevara, and Colt Cabana. Again, it's a wash, but the ChatGPT mentions that Colt Cabana actually steps in to replace Jungle Boy in this match. So that's implying that tag team of Darby Allin, Sammy Guevara, and Colt Cabana actually had Jungle Boy as a member, which would basically be 3 out of the 4 pillars. And that makes a lot more sense from a storyline perspective. So I'm surprised ChatGPT got that addition in there, because it seems actually really smart for doing that. Probably more coincidental than anything. But in the end, Darby Allin picks up the win for his team after hitting a coffin drop on Ortiz, who has been absent from AEW TV for a little while. Again, proving that there is maybe some tension in the Inner Circle, but there's no tension. There's nothing in the Inner Circle because they don't exist right now. Next up, we get a backstage segment in which Samoa Joe watches the main event on a monitor. He nods in approval at Darby Allin's victory, showing respect for the young competitor. But that wasn't the main event, so I'm not sure why. I'm sure that it's trying to imply that when the main event happens, he will be watching it live backstage. But maybe he's looking at that, trios match as well. Maybe they're building for a feud between Samoa Joe and Darby Allin. That could totally be likely. That is plausible. Um, but yeah, next up for the main event, which likely implied by ChatGPT, Samoa Joe will be watching this main event. Kazuchika Okada takes on Pac in a number one contenders match for the AEW World Championship, and that's a creative piece of booking, if you ask me. Pac and Okada is not a number one contenders match I would find on paper, but man, would it be good. Pac steps up to challenge Okada in a hard-fought match to determine the next contender for the AEW World Championship. Both men put on a clinic in the ring. In the end, Okada picks up the win with the Rainmaker, earning himself a shot at Samoa Joe's title in the future. Samoa Joe comes out to the stage to stare down Okada, setting the stage for their upcoming championship match, which would likely take place at a pay-per-view if you ask me. So I hope you guys thought that was fun. I'm just going to say generally most of these cards were a wash, but I think the more we do it, the more information we feed it. We're going to get better at, kind of directing it in certain ways. And you could see it had a few nuggets of hope, right? It had a few matches that would make a lot of sense and would be plausible in the current landscapes of WWE and AEW. But by and large, it got a lot wrong. It tried to tread a lot of water. It tried to bring back people that don't work at these companies anymore, and just kind of some silly decisions. But I do hope you enjoyed that segment. Again, let me know on my social media if you did or if you did not. I appreciate any kind of criticism I can get. But that will do it for this episode of the Marksville Wrestling Podcast. Thank you all for listening. As always, you can find me at Marksville Wrestling on Instagram. And the link in the bio is beacons.ai/Marksville Wrestling.com, which has all of my links within it. You can find the show wherever you would like to find it. You can find it on that link at my Instagram page. But again, I've been Owen. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate your time, and I will talk to you again soon.